Okay, so welcome everyone to today's dev call about the API and how do we proceed with the API. I'd like to first discuss a little bit or give a bit of an overview of what the story was so far, when the API, the idea of an API started and the work that has been done already. Then I want to talk about some doubts and issues and why the API is still not in the Bisq project. Especially, we had some discussion about authentication of there might be a bigger attack surface to Bisq with a web accessible API. We had the discussion about dependencies and so on. Then I would shortly discuss the side effects of having the API in the project in terms of testing. And last but not least, and the most important and large part of the call, how to proceed with getting the API into Bisq or something like this. So for starters, the story so far. The initial motivation for giving an API is, I saw in GitHub issues, it has been 2016, there is a Bisq bounty raised for the feature. In December 2017, there is some API related stuff as well. And even there's talking about a trading bot with the API. Work done. I think Mike did first some work in 2017, 2 parts, getting the API to work, and then there is some stuff Manfred did already that could be ported somewhere else. Manfred himself did some work in January this year. And Bernard started, I believe it was early 2018, working on the API, and since then there have been a couple of pull requests. Most of them have been closed. Some of them are still open. So I don't know, Mike, Manfred, Bernard, would you maybe lose some words about the history of the API and how we got here? Is there something that is interesting to all of us?
Well, it's a long time. It's a long time ago, as you say. But yeah, so I think in the beginning we all agreed that it would be good to have an API for certainly the market making side of Bisq. So it was first started as a separate project, so in its own repository. And in the beginning, a lot of workarounds were needed because, as you know, the UI state and the data model state are quite closely tied, or were at least at the time. So that took some work, and then I think somewhere in 2018 I started to work together with Bernard, and then he took over. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Bernard, but there are still some workarounds in the code. So there are, yeah, I think apart from the doubts and issues that you have listed, there is an extra issue. In order to keep the API as small as possible, there also needs to be some refactoring in the core to make it more API friendly. I think for the rest of the history, probably Bernard should take over now.
Yeah. So a lot of effort was put in research of various approaches that we could take, and in refactoring of the core, especially the startup sequence, so that we could have to make only the core startup without the desktop. And Manfred actually did this work because it was like too hard, at least for me, to do it. But now it's done, and we can easily start the core. And then a lot of work went into moving some stuff from the UI layer into the core, especially when we create the offer or take the trade. There's a lot of validation happening in the UI. So I think that that part is still to be done, but for the minimal version, we're okay with the current state of the core.
Yeah, maybe I give also a little bit of feedback from my side. Yeah, as both have mentioned, I have to, we needed to do some refactorings. I mean, the basic concept in Bisq was that when code was only used in the UI layer, then it was usually in the presentation classes there. And now we have basically a second client with the API. So we moved already a lot of this part to the core module to make it reusable for other applications. That's mostly, I would say 90% is pure technical refactoring. It's not very difficult. Some parts were more complicated, which I did mostly, like especially the startup stuff and so on. So from my overview, I think most of the difficult work is done. There's probably still an ongoing process to refactor more code from the desktop module to the core. And I think over the last half year or year, the security aspects became more more clear that we have to take a lot of care. One part was the authentication and so on, and I think there's still it's still open discussion how safe the current solution is. We had a few months ago we had already some discussions about this, and Battle of Wizard pointed out that the current token-based authentication has some vulnerabilities, and he has a lot of security and cryptography background, so we should take it very serious what he's finding out here. And the other part is when we the API could run as a pure headless version, and it also could be enabled in the desktop so that the desktop application what you start is also accessible with the API, which is somehow useful at least for the user. But when we would deliver our desktop application by default with the API, then if we would basically open some vulnerability surface to all Bisq users. So I think when we deploy it someday, we should deploy it in two different binaries. One, the desktop like it is without any dependency to the API, and one which is which has the dependency and where the API is enabled. And then only a small subset of users who really want this feature would have this extra risk exposure. I think we just have to be super, super careful with security. Bisq is already quite big, and when we would get attacked in that area, it could be a completely disaster for the project. So we shouldn't take this lightly at all. Another big thing is that as soon as the API is in production, with every code change, what we have to do, we have a larger set for testing and for supporting these features. Like at the moment, there's quite a lot of stuff going on with the mediation feature, with the protection tool feature. Very soon we have the new trade protocol, and all these efforts have to be always be made sure that the API is covering this as well. So that will make everything a little bit more complicated. I just want to point out that we have to be aware as soon the API is out, life is not easier in that area. And it's a little bit the question, what's the best strategy, how we should deploy it. I mean, when we merge it, the maintainers of Bisq take some responsibility when they get money stolen or whatever, and especially with API, it's automated code, there's higher risks. Like, yeah, when it depends on a button click from a user, it's not so easy to exploit, like when it's some automated code. And yeah, it's a little bit a difficult trade-off. So we need. I think we shouldn't, even if it's already such a for sure frustrating process for Bernard and Mike after so long time, and it doesn't still is not out. And so, but I think we shouldn't forget that we are we're dealing with high risks here, and we need to have the resources to make it really proper. I mean, alternative approaches like what is already in place that some people I think are using the branch from Bernard, and as it's open source project, anybody can do anyway with whatever they want. But as long as it's not merged in Bisq, the Bisq maintainers and the core contributors are not exposed to the risks. Basically, when somebody is forking Bisq and get exploited there, yeah, it's not our business at the end. So that might be another approach which adds some flexibility when basically Bernard is releasing this on his own and some people are using it and all the security risks. And so he has to take basically when people are using his branch, what's already happening in some extent, I think. And then there is less friction that, it's always dependent on the resources on Bisq that people are really able to review it, to make security audit and everything, and to get consensus that we really want to ship this, which is frustrating. I understand completely for Bernard. But on the other side, I think Bernard and Mike, you have to be aware that, we cannot add more risk as Bisq has already. And we are always short on resources since, I mean, it's getting better, but in the past, I was basically the only one who could really review this code and could merge it. And I'm basically not active in Bisq anymore. So at the moment, I'm not sure if actually when the whole trade protocol and the more complex part would get merged, if at the moment, I think nobody has really the competence to review and merge this, because nobody really knows all the details about the trade protocol. And so it's a little bit a difficult situation. And I would suggest to think about the solution to make a kind of like a step in between, where some users who really want to use the API are using this branch. It becomes a little bit more production ready, like it is already. I mean, I think some people are using it. Maybe you can give some update about this, Bernard. And then, it reduces frustrations because it gets really then used, and it reduces the pressure on Bisq developers. I mean, in Bisq, we have a lot of very high priorities, like the new trade protocol. And actually, there's another which I would like to mention, because I think that changes quite a lot the total risk exposure in Bisq. I mean, the biggest risk in Bisq is when somebody would manage to get access to the wallets and steal the Bitcoin from all the Bisq users who are online. And to reduce this risk, the best would be to get rid of the wallet. That sounds a little bit crazy at the moment, but it's not when you think in context of the off-chain trade protocol, where the trade is basically happening. The trade itself doesn't require Bitcoin on anything anymore. It's completely off-chain. So you could use any external wallet like your Bitcoin Core or your Tracer for sending your Bitcoin. And the only part, wallet-related part in Bisq, which would remain, would be the DAO part. And usually Bisq, traders don't have so much money in BSQ on their application. And even that money is then mostly bonded. So that's kind of like locked and much more safe. It cannot be stolen. And when we get to this, when we get this feature implemented, which is not completely unrealistic to get it out in the next half year, I would say, then the whole risk situation for Bisq is much, much better, because the worst thing then what can happen is that people are stealing your BSQ from your BSQ wallet, but you don't have any Bitcoin anymore directly in Bisq. So I just want to give a little bit this broader perspective that we are probably at the moment in a very vulnerable state, because we don't have enough developers, we don't have enough security audits, and it's lacking a lot of stuff in many areas. And we should really be terrible conservative also with dependency, adding any dependencies with increasing our vulnerabilities. And the API for sure is an area where we would increase quite a lot of vulnerabilities. So yeah, that's a little bit my point of view about the whole topic.
Okay, so let's say if we keep this fork of Bisq for the API, the big drawback for Bernard and for Mike would be that it's not merged into master, and based on the current policy, it wouldn't be up for compensation. But we do have kind of a similar situation, not similar situation, but something that is kind of similar with the mobile client, which also got compensated, but still on a separate repository, as far as I remember. So one way would be that. Yes. Yeah.
So which mobile client you're referring to?
The notification.
So I think only the iOS and Android repos we should actually fork it and have it in our control, basically. But yeah, I think that was never done. Yeah. True.
So if we, or let's say, if we are not merging, either Bernard and Mike gets compensated by consensus, even if it's not merged into master, or we use stuff like we discussed, I think, in the past. We have this referral ID property, which is also available in the trades statistics. So it would, if it would be hard coded in the forked version of Bisq, set to a specific identifier, and based on how much trading activity happens with this referral each month, compensation could take place. So
yeah, actually, I think that's a very good idea. And I mean, this policy the broader policy is that value added to Bisq get compensated. And when there are real users using the API, even if it's not merged in Bisq and it's a separate project controlled by Bernard, I think it's still valuable to make a compensation request and to get compensated for this. And even better, and I think to measure it, this referral flag or property, which we can support already, can be used for seeing how much trade volume has really actually happened, and that would make the compensation request more strong at the end when we see, okay, 20% of the trade volume comes from the API and we have increased trade volume, then it's completely clear that it has added value, even if it's not official Bisq project, basically. And yeah, I think the compensation request topic, we probably should separate this and not try to make a decision which might add to really to a higher vulnerability and risk in Bisq, just because we need to solve this problem that, of course, the developers who worked so long on this should get compensated someday.
But maybe we should try to merge it, because if we don't merge it, it will be really hard to keep up to date. Maybe we can't we move it to a contrib package or some market as it's part of Bisq that's not really yet officially part of Bisq, and it's not built in the default desktop client, and you have to run a different build to get the build with the API. But still, just to have it in master when we do refactorings, when we move stuff around, that it's not.
Yeah, but Christoph, so one thing is anybody who is forking Bisq, he can always rebase back, merge back the stuff from master. So it's his responsibility to always stay in sync. It would be actually then additional work for the maintainers, and it's the responsibility. I mean, when a maintainer is merging code and this code gets exploited and people are losing money, there are certain risks, and I would not underestimate this risk, even on the legal side. I mean, you never know what people who got lost money, they become very creative to try to make you troubles. And at the moment, as said, when the trade part is really implemented in the trade protocol, I don't see anybody at the moment in the current dev team who has the competence and the skills to review it on the level that to be really sure that this works and has no risks. And I'm the only one at the moment, and we have this bottleneck, and I'm not willing to take more risks like I have already. And I think the other maintainers probably also don't like to do this. And you, Christoph Sturm, when you would be one-time maintainer, you also should think very carefully if you are willing to take the risk that maybe tens of millions get stolen by something what you merged and maybe overlooked some risk and vulnerabilities. That's we're playing with application where a lot of money is already going through, and that's a difficult situation, and we are understaffed.
Well, we will always be understaffed. To sum up the work done, well, the 40-minute limit is back again. Okay, if we sum up the work done as it is, there is an API in Bisq, but it is in a separate repository, I believe. Is this correct?
Yes, this is correct. And the problem is that since it is not on a fork, then core team never cares about the compatibility with the API. And I've been rebasing and adjusting this over and over again. It took me so much time, and it's completely not the way to go. Because then new logic will be added into the core, and it will be like too tightly coupled. Nobody will take care of it. So to make it like really accessible from the API, and so right now I've got the core part. Just a second, Manfred. So I've got this minimal part, or even up to creating offer. So this is rebased against like current master, but the taking offer and completing the trade, it's still not. It's using some old code because I didn't manage. I didn't have time to rebase it like 5th time again, and this is going like to continue over and over again. So I don't see like if we're not merging this work, then I don't see like anybody doing this. I bet that anybody who would take on maintaining API on a separate branch or separate fork, they're going to dump it within like few months because it's like impossible to keep up that way.
Yeah, but Bernhard, in any way, when the API is merged into master, then this extra load of work is on every contributor who is doing any change, that they have to take care that it also works with the API and test it with the API and so on. And I mean, yeah, it's like with any project, when you are forking Bitcoin and you do something extra, you have to take care with every release, at least in Bitcoin, you have to merge it back and you have to adapt your fork that it's still compatible and works. And when it's the other way around, yeah, then the main project has to take care of this. And that's another thing. I mean, we need to be sure to have basically one owner of this code base, like you are basically the owner currently. And when there, yeah, like with the new trade protocol, with mediation enabled and so on, there will be bigger changes, and this will require bigger changes in the API as well, probably. Also, I don't know some API code so well, but there will be for sure some changes required. So when it would be already part in master, yeah, this effort for implementing the new trade protocol will have been, I don't know, 10 or 20% more effort. And so that's it's a trade-off anyway, that either every Bisq developer has additional effort, and especially then the testing effort, or it's an external project, and then yeah, you basically all the time, of course, you have to be sure to be in sync with. I mean, I think you don't need to do it on every commit base, but on every release base. That with every release, maybe you need a few days to get the stuff into that it works with the API again. And when you see, okay, people are still not taking care to make our code more reusable in core, of course, you can ping the developer and say, hey, please, here's a functionality which is required to be reused from API. So please don't do it in the desktop module, do it in core. And I think that's just a little bit of extra communication, and it's usually that's usually really not big problems. I mean, to have some validation from desktop and move it to core, that's done in 1 minute basically. That's usually technical refactoring, where you're moving a class, or where you move a method to 95%, I would say. So I agree. Basically, in the long term, of course, we should get it into Bisq. So it's just at the moment, I said, I don't have the time to review it and to give my okay on it. And especially, I'm not very experienced with on the authentication side, on that area. And when somebody like Battle of Wizard raise serious concerns, I take it very serious. And even if I wouldn't have known this and would have maybe accepted the previous solution, I would not accept it anymore when a security specialist raise concerns. So it's a difficult situation at the moment, because when we have 5 more developers and some developers can take has the full competence about this and is willing to merge it, fine. At the moment, we are not in this situation.
Just a quick interruption, Manfred. I myself have been I worked on the university in the topic of data security on the cutting edge, and we did a lot of stuff, and we knew things will happen before we knew things happened before Snowden said that it really did happen. So I'm a security specialist too, and if you say, well, it might be a chance that there is a security risk, then you get stuck. There is no moving forward, because security is always a fight against windmills. There is no winning. You are always behind one step, and that's it. That if you don't like the risk of Bisq, then we have to shut down Bisq. That's it. It's simple as that.
Yeah, sure. That's, I'm not saying this. I just, I mean, it's I think we just have to be very, very careful and very conservative. And we have already way too much. There's so much on the to-do list regarding. I mean, the security manager was never implemented. That we are restricting the application as far as possible. I ask Battle of Wizard to work on this, and many, many more things. So we have such a long to-do list of stuff what we need to improve, and to add more risks to a project which have already a lot of known risks and probably 10 times more unknown risks is just irresponsible, in my opinion. At least I will not take the responsibility for this.
Yeah, of course. That's the topic of responsibility is there, but it is also there if you say, well, we don't want to test something. We don't want the test suite, and it's a risk. In my eyes, it's a risk as well. And we decided to start doing tests now, and maybe it should have been done years ago, but that's another topic. But the argumentation is the argument is the same one. Anyhow, so this is the work done. Let's move on to the doubts and issues. I believe one big thing was the authentication. Given the situation we have Mike, yes, you want to say something?
Yes, it's tied to the doubts and issues, of course, but my idea is that maybe we should look specifically at the security other issues and try to limit the impact of them, such as for the authentication, it might be okay to only accept as well local-host calls for the dependencies, as long as they're not included in the main Bisq. It also limits the security. So maybe we should try to see how we can limit the security impact without losing too much on the API side. That's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, basically that's where I wanted to go. First, I want to discuss the authentication issues and what people think about it and how we can mitigate this stuff, and then go to this to the bigger attack surface and then to the dependencies. And that is exactly what we can do. We can just make an own app that uses the dependencies.
The way how to do this correctly.
But what if the app, the desktop app, could create a client-side TLS certificate, and you always have to use the client-side certificate if you want to talk to the API?
Yes,
I
of
mean,
course.
we also have to create a server-side certificate for TLS. So because it's a client-side app, so every user will need a way to create a TLS certificate for the server. And if we also create one for the client, that would be pretty secure.
That is first of all, TLS is only the common use of TLS we see in everyday web browsing is that you can make sure that you are talking to the correct web server. In this case, it would be the API. There is no authentication, nothing. There's just that you can say, well, this is the server I want to talk to.
Yeah, but you need a certificate for that, right?
Yes, of course. The server needs a certificate, and the certificate is whether it is somewhere on a public key server or it is a paid one. You have to have the certificate and have to go through a procedure to do this, and to actually to verify if the certificate is the correct one. If you the client TLS authentication is on the same level as the password authentication. You have the connection, you have the TLS connection. It's a secure connection. You have one-time tokens. There is no, you cannot replay. You cannot see if you crack the key from 2 years ago. You cannot decrypt a current communication. That is TLS. If you then do in the easiest part password authentication or do the client-side certificate thing, it's the same thing. Then you have some authorization that the client authenticates to the server, and this is something we can of course use. The issue is if you have let's say the situation with the localhost API only, and you require TLS to be, I don't know, to go there, and then if someone places in a malicious website a link to localhost something and tries to exploit your API, then TLS doesn't help you. Then you have to require some authorization, so that the user has to do something, provide some knowledge that the API can be sure that you actually want to do stuff. That is TLS. Keep in mind we also have Tor, and I believe the end goal is to use a Tor hidden service as a service for the API, so that mobile phones, for example, can access the API. And Tor does pretty much the same thing, except that you the same thing as TLS, except that you do not have to keep the you do not have to do stuff with the certificate. Tor has you don't have to use a directory for certificates. Tor has this onion address, and the onion address is basically the fingerprint of the certificate. And so if you reach this onion address, you basically have the verification that the service is the service you have. It's basically the same thing, but it does not help us with localhost only and authentication. That is the thing. I would let's say what we can do. First of all, limit it to localhost, and well, if there is no malicious website, then you are good. And then we must maybe add some basic authentication, a password, something like this, that you have to provide every time you want to use the API. Maybe use TLS, but it's much more complicated.
That's also what Bitcoin Core is doing. It's just an RPC, a user and a password for the RPC access on localhost.
Yes, and I am not familiar. I'm that familiar with RPC. Is there some session thing implemented, or do you have to provide the password every time?
No, you provide it every time.
It's only depending if you have encrypted your wallet, you need the password every time, and when it's not encrypted with RPC, by default it's only localhost. So when you want to have RPC enabled, then you have to set it extra. And I think it doesn't come with any security protection, so you have to,
You are on your own. Yes.
Yeah.
There is with Bitcoin, you've got this cookie file, which is stored like in one place on your hard drive, and if you're accessing it from your the node from the local host, then with the standard client, then this client now both server and client use the same file from the same disk location. So that's how they share the secret.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same stuff as Tor does with if you want to control your hidden service from the command line. There's also a cookie file, shared cookie file, and that is basically the session, and it is not replay safe. If you have the cookie file, or if you have the request, then replay is possible. Simple as that. But I think it's a nice. Nice is the wrong word. If Bitcoin uses this kind of authentication without the replay protection, maybe it is at first enough for Bisq as well. Just saying.
Yeah, we have to make it very explicit that basically we are not providing any additional security here, and people who want to use it in such circumstances have to know what to do. And exactly. I think that's the way how Bitcoin is doing it. They are not providing you anything because it's difficult and it's complex, and they're telling you, yeah, don't enable RPC when you have money on your wallet and when you're not exactly knowing what you're doing.
Yeah, that is basically the way to go for almost everything. If you cannot create something that is perfectly safe, and you cannot create something that is perfectly safe, you have to create some non-technical limitations. Okay, so for authentication, I believe we have some stuff now we can think about in the future. Is there something, Bernard? Yes.
Yes. So currently, what we've got implemented is that there is a password, and we store SHA-512 digest of this password inside the Bisq data directory. And when user needs to sign in using this password, and then they are granted a session token. And then the subsequent requests are being done with this token.
What technology is this? The session token? Is this some kind of cookie? Is this part of the URL?
No, you have to put it as a header. So just like you've got it with out, or you just include
as
it
a header. Okay,
yeah. So it's safe, because if anybody is trying to send you a link or an image that points to like localhost or even over Tor, then your browser will not automatically include the because it would include the cookie, right? And so that's why I put it in the token, in the header.
Yeah, basically. Well, to be exact, if you use a cookie or a part of the URI or the header, it's basically the same thing. It's a request and the data is there, and you send it every time. The only thing that is different from TLS, for example, for replay protection is that the server has to know. Yeah, well, there is no replay protection like this.
But I think that in future, if we want to do a replay protection, we could add like GPG keys, and we could sign the body, the payload, and put the signature into the header.
Yeah, but you have to for replay protection. You have to implement something with rolling nonce or something like this, because even if you sign something, then you can replay it as well. But that is another topic. We can discuss this offline if you want to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
That is.
So I just wanted to say, to mention, but currently I think that what we've got right now is compatible with what we have agreed, and we also have the support for Tor. So currently there is a possibility to provide a flag, a startup parameter, to specify a port or even the host name. By default, it's localhost. We could disable this so that users couldn't start it on non-local host, but I think we should give them flexibility to do that. And yeah, if you want to expose it over Tor, then you just expose the local socket and you proxy it over Tor. And that's also done right now.
Yeah. Okay, so for the ethics surface, I believe we already had some contributions in this call targeting this very point. We can just recite what we already had. We can create a separate app so that every user that uses Bisq can start Bisq up. There is no API enabled. If you want to use the API, you have to use an own binary, for example. Have to compile it something like this, and so there is much less additional ethics surface to Bisq because the API is not enabled by default. We can do some strengthening of more resilience for Bisq. As Manfred said, we can remove the wallet, for example, and have the wallet externally somewhere. Then
may I add here something?
Yeah, of course.
With the API, we would become also more vulnerable by intentional and by non-intentional attacks to the peer-to-peer network. So currently, for instance, you cannot create 1 million offers. You have to click 1 million times, so nobody will do this. With the API, when some script kiddie playing around and make some mistakes and get in an endless loop, and he has enough Bitcoin, he could spam the network with 1 million offers or something like this. Of course, we need to protect on the peer-to-peer network side anyway against all kind of stuff in that direction. But with API enabled, we get bigger exposure, and it becomes easier that something like this happens. And I think probably more they're unintentional, that there are some script kiddies are making mistakes and doing some stupid things, which is possible with the API and which is basically not possible in the current desktop app. I think that's a bigger risk because any attacker can do it anyway with modified code, and so. But I think we have to be aware of this as well.
Yeah, that's what I meant with raise the resilience. There is another option. We can just use a password derivation function, for example. The only cryptographic use of a password derivation function is that it takes time. That's it. And if you can implement it in the API as well. If you say, well, create an offer, then it takes some time to create this very offer, and that's where there is a limit to denial of service or brute force attack.
You mean proof of work? What was the term I was using? I was not familiar with this. It's basically proof of work, that you add some proof of work for as a DDoS protection, basically.
Password derivation function was, I believe, that it was the term. Yes, well, if you, as Bernard said before, it's currently implemented with some standard hash SHA-256 or something like this, derivation of the database entry. SHA is created to is designed to be fast. You can use a password derivation function. Basically, does the same thing, but is designed to be slow, so that you cannot. It takes some time to create a result, and you cannot do it faster on no hardware. And that is basically a break. Yeah, well, it takes longer for one job to be done, and then you cannot do that many jobs in a short time. Okay, so and last but not least, I believe it's the dependencies, topic dependencies, and I believe we already had this discussed as well. If we have the, for example, now every one of us starts the Bisq desktop application. If we have a Bisq API application, there would be a whole other set of dependencies necessary for the API application that is not in the desktop application. And yeah, that is I believe it's a good separation of concerns. Then there has been the discussion whether you want to try to create an HTTP API entirely from scratch. Well, I believe not, because you are bound to make errors, and yeah. Is there, do you, maybe, Christoph Sturm, do you have any thoughts on this? Any experiences?
On building a HTTP API from scratch without libraries, or?
Yeah, or maybe more generally, building something that is already present in a well-tested library and doing it by yourself. Is it better? Is it more secure? Is it less effort? Is it, I don't know.
I mean, I think it's probably clear to everybody that it's not a good idea to build something from scratch. And even I think HTTP API is like really complex. And I mean, what I would do is I would maybe use the smallest library possible that works, and maybe decide what features do we need. But yeah.
Yeah, I think with dependencies, we really, so first I really would suggest that we start now, that no dependency get added anymore. Any dependency requires a proposal and a discussion first before anything get added, and no maintainer should merge any change which adds dependencies. Removing is great. Updating to other versions also should be discussed before we do it, because every time we're taking some risk with this. And when I mean, in my opinion, with the API, there are a few big libraries which are probably not so well tested, and especially not security-wise, like Swalker and whatever. I don't know exactly what they are doing. I would have a better feeling when it would be a library like gRPC from Google. I mean, of course, there can be also vulnerabilities, but I mean, there are 1,000 times more eyes on Google library, like on some small. And I would argue against that, what Christoph Sturm just said. The best is to use a small API. There's usually small projects from 1 or 2 developers, which are much easier to exploit, like a big library from Google, or I mean, big library. I mean, from a more trusted provider. Like
okay, but that's the assumption that bigger companies make bigger libraries and smaller teams make smaller libraries. That's just not true. I mean,
no, yeah, that's right. No. I just want to say also the primary focus should be. Is this provider more trustworthy or less? Like, do you trust Swalker more, or do you trust Google more? for not having security
or
vulnerability.
IntelliJ.
Yeah, but if it's a small library, then
now sure, it's better when it's a small library from Google, like it's a big library from Google. But I would prefer a big library from Google over a small library from a nobody.
Sure.
Okay. So
I mean, so basically, I think for me, the HTTP library, server library that I like most is Undertow, and it's from Red Hat. And okay, I mean, it's not Google, but it's, yeah. And and I like it because it's small and it has no dependencies. I mean, Chatty is probably also good, but it's like, it's a huge library. But that's I also don't think that there is exploit code in Chatty. I mean, I don't know.
I believe it's more the topic of let's say you have a very big library, and it's easier to overlook something in a big library than it is in a small library. But well, it's software, and we all know every piece of software is buggy. It's just the chance that a small library that does exactly what you need is in the area you need, less buggy than a really big library that does 100,000 of things at once and all perfectly safe. And yeah, well, it's same old.
I think we just have to be aware we are in the crypto space. There are different incentives. When a normal, like this exploit with one nodes library, which were used in one, I don't remember which exchange it was, and they got hacked and got stolen a few millions. And millions of other projects used this node library, and there was no incentive to hack them because there was no money. But when there is Bitcoin applications are using this library, and there is just some small team or developer, and it was just some other dependency which got exploited, then it's the way to get into to take over the application. And as said, I mean, midterm, I think we really should push the off-chain trade protocol, because at the end, I mean, that's another topic, and maybe we can discuss it in 1 or 2 weeks. But I think when there are big problems where are no good solutions, the best solution is to get rid of it by removing the thing. Like when you cannot make an application where a lot of money sits on it safe, and you never can make it safe. Basically, also Bitcoin Core can be hacked theoretically when somebody finds an exploit. Then just move it out and delegate it. I mean, when Bisq users don't have the Bitcoin on Bisq anymore, but on Bitcoin Core, and Bitcoin Core get hacked, it's not our responsibility anymore.
Yes, okay. Do we have any more contributions to the doubts and issues part of today's DevCore?
Yeah, but what's the? Are we going to have the summary, and what we're going to do with those?
Yeah,
or later on, or at this point?
Bernard, I want to ask you again. What is your main concern about this idea? Because for me, that's the most practical approach, that basically you are making the API production ready on your repository. It becomes used and so on. And it's completely out of scope of Bisq. You are responsible that you are keeping track of the changes, and be aware that midterm, I would say in half a year, we have a completely different trade protocol, or maybe 2 applications. It's not decided how it will look like, but the off-chain trade protocol has nothing to do with the current trade protocol. It's a completely different beast. So,
is there a change in the API, in the core API?
I mean, so it's a completely different trade protocol, different system. There is no multisig anymore, and it's everything much easier at the end. Because I don't want to get into in this topic. We can have a call maybe in 1 or 2 weeks. But for me, it's very clear that we have to go in this direction, because that's the solution for many problems, for usability, for speed, for security, for privacy. It just solves so many problems at once that it shows that it's so superior. We have to go there. And so at the moment, the current trade protocol is much, much more complex because it's with the multisig and with the blockchain confirmation and everything that makes everything much harder. When it's when we don't have this anymore, it will become much easier also. So just wanted to give you a little bit the background to keep this in mind, that not in far future the current trade protocol will fade out. It might coexist for a while, but it doesn't have a long-term future. And not only because of our plans, also because of the transaction fees. At some point, transaction fees will become too expensive that the current trade protocol is feasible.
Yeah, but then there's the question if there is enough value to keep the current API alive until the off-chain trade protocol is there, and then it has to be re-implemented completely. Or I'm just saying that the value for the project to keeping something alive, that will be then just not useful anymore in 6 months' time.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, it's maybe too short to make an estimation. Yeah,
because people not only has to be maintained, but also it has to be used enough that it creates enough value, so it's justified to keep it around until that time.
I would like to also Justin Carter maybe is working on this already on the conceptual side to finalize the concept and think more about it. And I have not talked with him over the last days, so I don't know if he made any progress and if he got deep into it. We need basically 1 or 2 dedicated developers at the moment. Yeah, Justin Carter was the only one who started.
Let me rephrase the question. Will the GUI change?
Everything will change. Maybe it's a completely different application which run in parallel with a different network. It's not, that's one of the questions. I mean, in short, this off-chain trade protocol will separate the trade with the security model. At the moment, it's in one because it's the multisig. It's in the trade protocol. The multisig is basically giving you the main security. In the off-chain trade protocol, you can send euro to dollar. You don't need any Bitcoin. And the security is based on Bisq bonds. When you scam the other, you risk that you lose your bond. And with that, it's a little bit like with Lightning. You only need to set up one time a bond, and then you can trade basically infinitely up to the limit of the bond. And the bond is managed in the peer-to-peer network and with the DAO. But the trade protocol itself is just sending one currency and receiving another and making the confirmation and have some sort of arbitration or mediation. It's basically the same like mediation. They don't have any executive power. They only can make a suggestion that one of the peers were basically the scammer and he should be confiscated, and then the DAO is the executive who will do the confiscation of the bond. So that's in short the overview. And that then you can do the trade when you make a Lightning, Bitcoin to Lightning or Litecoin. Yeah, the trade can be done in 5 seconds when both are online, or it can be automated in the code as well. So we get a completely, all the requirements, the difficult requirements, what we have at the moment, that you need to wait for the blockchain confirmation and the other user need to be online and many things are gone then. So it will be a huge usability improvement. And as said, the trade protocol itself will become very trivial, and the complexity will be only in the management of the bond in the peer-to-peer network and in the DAO. And of course, the risk for Bisq will move much more to that areas than the peer-to-peer network and the DAO are the critical infrastructure, because when they would not work, then nobody could trade. So, but nothing can be stolen, so that's much, much better. Okay. But yeah, we can discuss this maybe in 1 or 2 weeks, because I know that nearly nobody is really aware of it, and I think we need to focus to get this done, because it's just so much better like the current stuff what we have.
This would change. So what you're saying is, if it changes the application as it is now, the GUI, it would change the API. It would change basically everything you have in new Bisq that is not compatible with the old one.
That's an open question to discuss. That's too early to say now how we do either integrate both or separate it or make a transition. Yeah, we have not thought about this yet. But the trade protocol part is a completely different thing. The rest that you have the DAO, basically the only remaining stuff is the DAO and that you have the mediation or something. All the other features which are related to the trade protocol and the wallet are not required anymore. So yeah, it's a question how it will be deployed if it's yeah. But yeah, I think with everything what we are doing now, and maybe we can have a dev session in the next 1 or 2 weeks, because there are many other, there are quite a few ideas but basically nobody knows. And also from priorities, there are some important priorities which are not really, people are not really aware of them. And I think, of course, people have different opinions about priorities, but at least everybody should be aware what's already, which ideas are already out and which ideas are already there. Most are documented, partly at least, in the proposals repository, but there are so many proposals that nobody's reading the stuff anymore there. So I think it would be good to have a dev call to go over all the priorities and all these ideas and projects, and to get a kind of like a common that everybody is on the same page.
But the list of open offers will be there in the future as well, or
yeah,
a list
probably,
of open offers.
Yeah, so there will be an offer book. Yeah, there will be an offer book, and of course some new form of execution of the offer. But
yeah, but there is a offer book, and you can say, well, I will take that offer.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's basically, you see an offer, somebody, it will be automatically checked that the guy has enough bond. You need to have enough bond that you can take the offer. Then you get in touch with them. You're exchanging the other part. Or you're exchanging both.
Okay, but it's not all different. It is still doable with an API. Yeah,
sure. There will be also an API, but the current API, which is tailored to the current trade protocol, that will have no value anymore. The infrastructure of the API will have value, of course, but not the current methods, like creating an offer, taking an offer, waiting for the confirmations. All that will be different or gone. And that's a complex part in Bisq. I mean, the whole trade protocol is not trivial.
Okay, so before we get kicked out of the meeting again, I'd like to restart the meeting one last time, and then we talk about how to proceed with the API. So any suggestions how we should do this? What is the goal? Is the goal still to have it in Bisq or not? The ultimate goal.
I think long term, it's probably a goal. Makes it more clear, and people, I mean, when there would be RPC API for Bitcoin Core from some third party, you wouldn't probably trust it as much when it's from the Bitcoin developers. And I think at some point we should get to the point where we can take the responsibility for this. At the moment, I'm just not sure if we have the resources to complete it. I mean, from my point of view, I would like to have a security specialist for the access part, for the authentication and all this, and then somebody need to be able to review it, and then we have to be sure that we have basically a code owner, that Bernard is still then all the time helping to maintain the API when it's, because there will be additional work and test effort. I think more realistic and easier maybe is the other approach, that Bernard is basically keeping it in his and taking care that it's synced. And as said, you can point out to developers who are not taking care to make new code easier to be reused by the API by having the stuff in the core. but the main work that, like now with the mediation and with the trader chat, I don't know if that affects much the API, but the mediation will affect the API. There are some changes in the trade protocol. So you have to implement it anyway on your side then. And yeah, to have the burden then on the developer when the API would be part, I would have to add then the objects to the value objects on the API side and as well. So I need to know much more about the API. I need to test it. I need to maintain the code. So
can we somehow strictly create a strict separation of concerns? API is nothing else as another form of a GUI. Can we separate things, and also if there is a new trade protocol somewhere in the future, can we try to create a Java API that a web application can use and a web API can use, that a GUI API can use, a GUI application can use, without having to redefine stuff? There is the easiest thing is there is a method. It says, well, create offer, and then you call the method and say, well, this much of this and this much of this, and that's it. It can be used by every means of API. Can we use stuff that is?
I mean, most of these core methods are a Java API, which you can directly use from any, and yeah. Also to 80% that's in place already. Of course, there's missing some refactoring for some validation and whatever stuff, but the core methods are all in there. When you create an offer, there is the open offer manager, manager, which has some API methods for this.
Is there? I believe in the testing dev core, Bernard said something about there is some business logic still in the GUI part that he had to reconstruct in his API. Is there a chance that we can move this part of the business logic to core? For starters?
Yeah, that's for sure. All this small stuff missing. I'm not aware if anything critical and anything difficult is missing, but there might be small, like some validations, some small methods which are in the create offer presentation classes, and they can be refactored to move to core. But I think that's not a big challenge. I think that's not the showstopper. That should be doable by any Bisq developer.
Yeah, but it is something we can do and reduce the gap between the API and the core, and also reduce the efforts Bernard has to maintain. If some business logic in the GUI changes, he has to reconstruct it, and if it's in the core, that is not necessary anymore.
Yeah, and I think Bernard would be the best candidate because he knows exactly which stuff is still missing, and I think the missing stuff is all. I don't think when there is some really complicated, he can ping me that I can help, but I'm not aware of anything which should be too complicated to move. And yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. But when you don't have this, when nothing is forcing you to do something, to design the solution in like stateless way, why nobody will care about it. Nobody will try to do stateless managers, and
yeah, but I mean that's not the big problem. When
I think, sorry, yeah.
Now when people are aware that there is a second application is using this, then you have to take care. And when they are done doing, you can tell them, and then the second time they will take care. So I think that should be not that such a big. And there was no reason to make something reusable when there was only one client basically.
Yeah, what I wanted to mention, I think that's not something that needs to be communicated to all developers who are contributing. It is something that just has to become communicated to the maintainers of the Bisq repository. And if we do have this kind of as a merge requirement, then nothing gets merged that doesn't fulfill the requirements. And so there won't be any communication effort on Bernard's side, I think, if that's clear. But it will make it much easier for everybody
if the API code is inside the main repository, and because it will break the build. Yeah,
yeah, that's true, but it makes it on the other side much harder for any change, because you have to do the change on the API side, and you have to understand the API to be able to do this. So that's a little bit the trade-off.
Yeah, but the API is
for you it's less work, for all the other developers it's more work. That's
yes, but it serves other developers as a guidance to keep things in a certain way, to keep them stateless. And really, the way that people don't have to be aware of API, they just see that the code in core is consumed in certain way.
But look, Bernard, it doesn't matter if we would agree that this is good or bad. Code can only be merged to Bisq when it's really well reviewed and well tested, and especially critical code which is touching the trade protocol, and that is what the API is doing at the end. That's the goal.
No, it does not.
Sorry?
No, it does not.
Also, when the API, I mean, that's a goal that you can do automated trades and create offers. At the moment,
yes, but it does not touch the trade protocol.
Yeah, but it's using it. I mean, I want to say
it's using it. Yes,
nobody can merge this code without really proper review and really proper testing.
Of course, and that's why I said that we can reduce the distance between the API and the Bisq code by moving the business logic to the core, and then we have less of a distance, and it's easier to maintain. So I believe we can agree on that. Doing these refactorings that are still missing is a way to go forward. And doesn't hurt anyone.
Yeah, and another thing for me that would be a good idea to do now until we have a good idea how long the off-chain trade protocol will take, is to add this referral ID to the existing repository, just to see how many people are using and building from source the current API already. If no one is using it, yeah, that's also something that we have then to take into consideration how to move forward. As soon as we have to know how long the off-chain trade protocol will take.
And do you have any numbers?
I'm not aware of anyone using the API right now, because it's been scattered across so many, like my fork, Mike's fork, and we had also like two versions, because Bisq meanwhile was split into different modules, then into monorepo, and yeah, so we didn't manage to keep up with all those changes. So I don't think that anybody is using it.
Sorry, Bernard. Could you then just add this referral ID or different referral IDs in different repositories, so that we just have, until we have the remaining business logic in core, probably already have some numbers, or we don't have any numbers, then that's also a finding that we are 100% sure that no one is using it, at least not for real trading. You know what I mean?
You mean that we are setting the referrer ID when it's a normal Bisq application?
No. That there is that the referral ID is set manually in the code for in the fork of Bisq, in the API forks. Or different.
I mean, the official API fork is not production ready, and I think nobody's using this. But I mean,
that's a question. I think
already it's not maintained since half a year. It doesn't have the DAO. You cannot use it actually. You get disconnected, or you cannot trade at least.
Okay, so
it doesn't have the version.
Okay, so people are using the pull request, the pull request.
Yeah, branch. I think when people are using it, but Bernard said that probably also nobody's using his repo. But I thought that in the past some people were playing around with it. But another complexity, like now a big complexity in Bisq is always how to stay backward compatible, and that's sometimes very challenging when you have bigger changes, like now with the mediation feature, and it's already very challenging to do it with only one Bisq application. When there would be the API out already, it would have been even much harder. and the testing effort as well. Testing effort is already astronomous busy. You cannot test all the cases because they are nearly unlimited. With API, it would be double because you have a second application with the same amount of variations and so on. I just want to point out, as soon we have the API fully in Bisq, and that's for sure a long-term goal, we just have to be aware it has some costs, and the costs are considerable. They are not trivial and not small. For developing, for testing, and the way how to deploy it, for instance, with being sure that it's compatible.
Yes, but Bernard already does the stuff, and he will do it then as well. So I believe the efforts for the sum for all of us get maybe a bit lower. So I don't believe that effort is a topic we can decide. We can use to decide on whether to not implement the API. Okay, referral ID. Isn't there a version ID or a version field somewhere in the protocol? I believe.
No, we only use for the Drake protocol version, which hasn't changed since the last hard fork. With that, we could basically enforce everybody need to update to be on the same Drake protocol, and only people with the same trade protocol can trade together. And we don't use the deployment version because I think the capabilities are more flexible. You are not interested if people, when we now make the 1.16 release and maybe then there's a hotfix with 1.17, you don't want to have logic to check the versions and so on. With capability, we know the capability which is relevant stuff is mediation. So we can use that data basically.
Okay, but I created some graph on the monitor to it shows how many what's the percentage of which version in the offers. We talked about getting this on a per application basis so that you can monitor which versions are out there, and I believe that's a good thing because we don't know what versions are out there, and then we could add to the version number, let's say a suffix of API or something like this, and then you know, well, okay, and that much API applications are out there. Maybe we can use this or in order so that we can find a picture of how it is.
For monitoring reasons, we could add version at those data which are where it makes most sense. It's just it's also with offers you cannot add and change any data because it will break the hash. So when you get an offer from a user who is not updated, you will reject it because with your application you have a version field, it's not set, so it's a different hash, and you will reject it.
Yeah,
so that's
I think at the moment I extract the data from the offer ID, which has as a suffix the last three.
That's only when the offer has been created. That's not when. Doesn't mean that the user is using this version. So maybe we should.
Of course, it's the version of the offer. And if we do something with price notes, for example, we can maybe get a more actual picture.
Maybe we can discuss this separately because I think there are other data fields where it's easier, which are not used for, which are not verified by the hash, like the offer is verified by the hash. You cannot change anything. When we put it in other messages, then it's much easier to add values. So we get the same benefit.
Basically, we can add this to the how to proceed points that we create some metric and see how much use the API gets, and well, we can maybe do it for the whole Bisq network because it's quite interesting for governing the Bisq and steering Bisq. So I believe the getting an idea how many usages such an API, for example, has is quite a point we can add to the list. Well, then. What can we do for a slow start?
I think the idea of having a Java API inside of core is quite interesting, because of course you can call the open opera manager and all that separately, but if you already have kind of the essential method calls in one class, then the API becomes just a wrapper around it to provide HTTP and security and all that, but then it becomes a lot lighter. So that might be interesting, I think.
Yeah, but as said, that basically exists. I mean, the Open Offer Manager is the API for open offers. And we maybe could make a facade to have it a little bit more high level, Rob, than I did this when I made this example with the gRPC for the balances, for instance, to have then a balance facade where you only get stuff which is interesting for the API, and more low level stuff is in other domains. But mostly, I think, yeah, we shouldn't have one class API facade which has then 5,000 lines of code and doing everything. Yeah, that's not a good idea. To keep it in different domains, that for the trade and for the offers and for the DAO, you have their API methods, the main domain objects which are providing the API classes methods. I think that's basically in place. Of course, as we didn't have other clients, there might be room for improvements and refactorings when we have a separate client using it, and then we see, okay, it should be changed in that way. But architecturally, I think it's basically in place. Doesn't mean that it's perfect.
Yeah, and we have on the list that we move the remaining 100%.
Yeah, but
business logic.
I mean, here we have to be careful also. I mean, there in the UI, you need a lot of small stuff like formatting some string, and you want to show, for instance, how much fee it is in euro and in dollar and whatever. And it's a question if you really want to have the same functionality in the API. When you want it, then you move it. Otherwise, you don't want to move this to core, because then core gets a monster.
Yeah, yes, of course.
Then the UI is only
core has to be concerned. It's of course.
Yeah, and you will have many things done differently, because for the UI, yeah, you want to have it. I mean, there was some reason to have this UI presentation model classes and so, because that's what really the UI wants usually. And some stuff is now want to be reused, especially validation and more business logic. But some not, because when there's no other use case, there's no reason to move it. So
yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Because this is exactly, it's funny, the two classes you mentioned, the Open Offer Manager and the DAO facade, were exactly two classes that I stumbled on and when looking around. And I was thinking exactly the same thing, that the Open Office Manager is quite a mess and it needs some kind of high level wrapper. But then I saw DAO facade, oh, okay, this pattern already exists. But if you look exactly at how the DAO facade interacts from the GUI, then it isn't, the methods don't wrap all the business logic. As you said, some things need to be handled in the GUI that aren't, I don't know, that aren't easy to be put behind the method, because the one use case flow requires multiple steps, and there are confirmations in between stuff. Another option that I was thinking of, we're having, instead of like a facade kind of class that offers individual methods, you have even smaller use case classes that can like bundle the main entry point to a use case plus possible continuations. And if you call it from the GUI, then there can be logic in between the continuation calls. And if you call it from the API, then whatever method is calling into the use case can just call all the methods in a row or whatever, if you don't need some kind of confirmation. And I also noticed that the presentation was in the core. And when I saw this, I was really, really confused. Like, oh, this really needs to be in the desktop. But now I understand you're moving it over to facilitate the API use cases as well. But I really think that we need to be careful not to reuse too much. I don't know, maybe this was already talked about, but like I think it's really, really useful to separate the model, the domain model that's happening, that's used in core from the data model that is being used to present the things to the UI, and even also from the data model necessarily potentially that is being persisted and broadcast on a network. I think these are different things, and if you bunch them together, you get a lot of coupling that is really, really hard to take apart, because those concerns are so different. And if you have logic that concerns all of those different things, and you try to put it into one kind of object just because it handles similar data, then you get a lot of mess, in my experience.
Yes, I mean, this DAO facade was actually a failed experiment. I tried first to have this kind of like high level, and at the end it was just pointless delegation. And later in the DAO development, I moved back to use then the domain classes directly in the few domains, because at the end, and I never had the time to really clean it up and to get rid of the DAO facade again, because at the end it didn't make sense. And it was for me an example. Yeah, I mean, to have this kind of like high level, yeah, it's nicer, but then it grows too big and it does a lot of stupid delegation. It's maybe not, it's not always really easy to find the right, it's not optimal, I know, but it's also not really easy to make it optimal. But it's an ongoing process. We need to improve all this, and there's for sure much headroom.
I think as soon as we want more than one client, like the GUI and the API, you have to have some kind of high-level entry point, or your testing load will just explode. You only want to have to test one entry point.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, well, okay. So basically, we agreed on moving stuff to the core that belongs to core, and don't move stuff to core that does not belong to core. And maybe we can use this as a entry point to end-to-end testing, because I believe Bernard has some pretty impressive tests already for end-to-end testing. However, he uses his API. If we have core functionality, the core API, that we can use it without any further business logic, we can do the testing with the core API. And maybe we can reuse the stuff Bernard did on testing there as well, so we can close the gap between the API and the Bisq even more. Is this a way to go, you think? Well, I take that as a yes. Yeah, well, and then authentication. I don't know. Any suggestions?
Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Sorry, because I was speaking and I think it wasn't sending my voice. Okay, so you were asking if reusing my testing approach would be good. Well, the API gives you the programmatic access, and it is really doing it like end-to-end, right? And if you would like to do it on the core level without any possibility to communicate from the outside, then you would have to start like both clients, like this, like Alice and Bob, from the same Java machine, right?
I have not thought about that in such detail.
Yeah, if you want to have like the separation on with Docker on to having different clients on different Docker containers, then I think you need to have API of this or other flavor. But there needs to be some possibility to steer to derive the Bisq from the outside. Otherwise, you just have to run it on the same machine, and there's less separation.
Yeah, as it's not possible to run Alice and Bob on the same machine, and it would be limiting basically to test functionality, but not to make a full trade. And yeah, So
but if it's in a Docker container, can't you just, you're talking about, because if it's bound to localhost, then it will be only in the container and nothing can hit it from the outside. Is that the problem? Hello?
No, so I think that the issue is that when you run analysis in a container, there is just nothing listening. There is no API at the moment inside of as well, so there is no way to talk to the Bisq application.
Ah, there's no way to talk to the application when it's running in a container.
no, I think it's basically when you would like to test, yeah, you make a trade and you want to check if basically if the stuff happened on the other application, you cannot test it. When you run Alice, yeah, your test can never tell you if the message arrived on Bob's side. And I think the integration test what Bernard did is basically testing, as far as I understood, this full process that, yeah, when you take an offer, that the offer is really taken out from and gets the data from both application and combines it and finds out if the protocol has been executed correctly. Is this correct, Bernard?
Yeah, yes, exactly. And those two machines are really separate file systems, separate networking. So they really have to connect through the seed node to meet each other. So there is the whole peer-to-peer network being tested. So those are really end-to-end tests. And
Awesome.
I think and the same with completely different like data directories.
Okay, then I would say we can. How about that? If we have this the business logic moved and maybe we are successful in testing some on the core level, we can think about creating a Bisq-API, for example, application that is not supported by the Bisq community. It's just there. You can play with it, but be careful and make small steps towards using it for trading. Maybe start by just getting a list of offers. Is this feasible?
Yes, it is feasible, but the main problem is that, like I guarantee you that within like 1 month, the core will be completely different than it is right now, and this will be like constant chase from the API maintainers to go back to core, fix stuff in core, and then port it back to the API. While if it would be inside the main repository, then those people who introduce the changes would do it in a way that would be compatible with the API. I know that this is the cost that Manfred wants to get rid of, but that puts like enormous costs on the API maintainers, and I would have to know, and whoever would maintain the API, we would have to know exactly all the aspects of the main application of the core Bisq. And every change that anybody introduces, we would have to be up to date with this, and probably then chase back, because that change could be incompatible. We would have to like do the job that somebody else who was introducing the change, they should be supposed to do that properly.
Can we maybe is it thinkable that we integrate the API as is, but only enable it in debug mode? There is some command line arguments, I believe, where you can say, well, it's only debug mode and it's not for productive use. Can we do this? Is this a way we can address hosting?
That's how it works right now. You have to explicitly start the application with very specific flags. And even we've got another flag that some endpoints that we consider like too risky or experimental, they are not available unless you explicitly put this enable experimental endpoints or features flag.
Yeah, but here I want to step in. There might be people who say, oh, I don't care, I'm taking this risk, but it's not only their risk. They are creating risk for the whole network and for the other trader, because can be that he starts a trade and there is an issue because it was not compatible, and then the other trader gets in a dispute and lose time and in the worst case money. So it's a little bit more complex. And as you said, Bernard, you made it to the point. Either it's like at the current, I mean, there's a lot of effort on this mediation and then soon the new trade protocol. The effort would be 20% minimum more or even higher when we would have already API code in place. So the effort has to be done by those people, and it would take longer to get these important features out. And on the other side, you have the effort. Of course, when now this stuff get released, you have to update it, and you have to make sure that your API is understanding this and is compatible again. So the effort is on either one side or the other side. And of course, nobody wants to take the effort. That's natural. But I think at the current level in Bisq that we are super short on development. We have very important stuff what should be out as soon as possible and should have get out already long time ago. From my point of priority, I think it's more important that we get the new trade protocol out as soon as possible. Also the off-chain trade protocol. It has, in my opinion, a high priority, like to have the API out where it's initially anyway not fully featured, so people cannot use it basically for trading. Before it's not fully featured, that they can do full trades and use it for automated trading and so on. It doesn't really add value when people only can play around and can see offers. That has no real value for Bisq and for Bisq users. So it will become only really valuable when it's fully there, and that's a big effort to get there. And
but we have to find a way to get there if you want to get there. I propose the following. We have 2 minutes left on this dev call, and I like to conclude the dev call now. We had some interesting points, interesting facts. I will sum them up. The video will be available on YouTube in a few hours or days, and each of us may think about it, and maybe we can find new approaches to the whole thing. We have some agreement now. And I like to repeat create a follow-up dev call about the API, let's say in a week's time or something like this, and then we can start fresh and on a new basis where we can discuss the things that are left open. Is this a way to go?
Yeah. Okay. I just want to mention that the balance of the efforts is not the same, and it's always far less effort to do things right up front, to design it properly, than to do it in a way that you have to come back and rework the thing because you didn't consider that you should have some kind of client support. Because it's like doubling the effort, and yeah, that's my take. Okay, so thanks for joining, guys. I will schedule a follow-up for next week or so. See you there, and have a nice day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.